Well, welcome. Tonight we have quite a group here. We have a referendum coming up. As always, anybody who's watched, if you're one of the 6 who's watched my show before, you'll know I'll never ask you to vote yes or no, but I'll beg you to vote and to be informed when you vote. So tonight we're going to talk about the referendum coming up. But before we get to the referendum, why don't we have some introductions?
I'm Amy Leone, and I'm a mental health counselor here in Milford, and I'm really here as a resource. Someone who works in the community on substance prevention and with many addicts, and really just wanted to be here based as a resource based on my experience.
My name is Chris Udalo. I'm the founder and chief scientific officer of Proverti Laboratories. We're one of the accredited laboratories that is recognized by the state for ensuring the safe testing of cannabis to ensure consumer safety.
And you never blow your own horn, but one of the most prominent testing laboratories
Well, I'd like to think so. We work
in the
hard at it.
country. So, when we look around the country, if you're not the first, you're awful close to the top of every list in Milford.
We're very proud of what we've done here in Milford.
I'm Brian Cole. I'm the spokesman for the Citizens for Responsible Cannabis Retail Sales, also known as Milford Can. Our position essentially is that we are urging people to vote no, and we believe that cannabis would be better served regulated the way that alcohol is currently regulated in town.
And if you get negative impressions from people, it's probably more to deal with your baseball affiliation being non-Red Sox.
I'm not at liberty to discuss that tonight.
I'm Donna Nero, and I am the chair of Milford Cares. Milford Cares is a small grassroots organization, and CARES stands for Citizens Against Retail Recreational Establishments. And we are supporting we're basically pro-Milford. Our goal is to support the health, safety, and integrity of the community. So a lot of our members have long-standing roots in town, and Milford has a lot to offer. Milford has grown into a very diverse, family-oriented community with a lot of great things to offer, and we would like to see the quality of life maintained in town.
Brian Murray, State Representative. Al, nice to see you. Thank you for having me here.
It's been so long, it's been at least a couple weeks.
Really, yeah.
Mike Walsh, member of the Milford Board of Selectmen. Good evening, Alan. Thank you.
Okay, first thing, yes means no, no means yes. It's totally confusing to old people like me.
And young people like me.
Okay, can we start with what is the referendum, and then somebody tell me what does it really mean?
Well, let me speak, and thank you, Chris, for bringing this, by the way. We changed the referendum. The original referendum, the main part of it would not prohibit marijuana cultivators or marijuana product manufacturers. And the Board of Selectmen didn't think that that was sufficient, so we tightened it up to read, including marijuana cultivation, marijuana testing facilities, and marijuana product manufacturing. I was not at the meeting Monday night, but Monday night, they grandfathered Chris's company, Proverti, and Sage Industries, grandfathered him under the statute. Meeting Chris here tonight for the first time, and all of us having a conversation with him, I'm going to get him some information, some answers to some of the questions he has, because his company does a lot of great things, in the testing of what they do. So I promise you that I'll get you those questions. So the confusion is that yes, if you vote yes, you do not want retail sales in the town of Milford. If you vote no, you're saying you do want.
So yes means no
Yes,
store.
yes.
That was the intent. But yes also means, except for your company and one other, no testing, no manufacturing,
Correct.
No
For-
cultivating,
no.
no growing, no, what else is on
Well,
there?
wait a minute, help me understand now, Bram. No growing.
Yes.
I thought the state law said I'm allowed to grow.
Sorry, no cultivators, so no
No growing
professional
for sale.
growers. Yes, there will still, this is an important point that you brought up. There will still be marijuana in Milford.
Right.
People will still be able to smoke marijuana.
I can
People
go in my
still be-
backyard and smoke marijuana if I want to.
You sound really excited about this.
It's only been 40 years since I could say we tried that, but yes.
Al, let me read it to you again. So it says, including marijuana cultivation, marijuana and testing facilities, and marijuana product manufacturing. Those are the 3 key areas on the new
Now,
referendum.
product manufacturing, is that like gummy bears and edibles?
It could be tinctures, it could be capsules, it could be brownies, it could be gummy bears.
Okay, so it's basically taking your cannabinoid distillates and putting it into something I'm going to eat.
Yes. And oftentimes, that's a way of ensuring an accurate reproducible dosing. So whether people are using it medicinally or adult use cannabis, sometimes when you're using the flower, it's very difficult to understand dosing. But when you extract the cannabinoids from the plant material and you formulate it into another product, you could make a capsule that's always 10 milligrams or 20 milligrams of CBD. It's very easy to reproducibly dose those.
Okay.
And that's why we feel strongly that it's important to have organizations like yours and these cultivators and these producers in town, because the alternative, Al, hypothetically, let's say you have your plant in the backyard and you want to make some brownies. Like he said, it's very difficult to get a very consistent dose, and I think that's what we've seen. And our argument, in a nutshell, is that retail pot is safe pot.
Okay. Let me take a step and ask. So yes means no. If I vote yes, theoretically, if I was the only vote, and I vote yes, no retail sales in Milford.
And that goes back to the law that was passed. So as part of the law that was passed in November to legalize recreational marijuana in Massachusetts, it gave municipalities the right to opt out of the recreational industry in town. So it was, so Milford is basically giving that right to opt out, to decide whether or not to allow or to prohibit. So the language in the law is that's where the confusion lies. And so the way that the referendum ballot is written reflects the language in the law, and that is, shall Milford opt out of or prohibit
We need a better description, because it really sounds like yes means no pot store. That would be the referendum I would understand.
Right,
But-
and yes means no. Yes, voting yes would prohibit retail recreational marijuana and the cultivators and the testing facilities
Well,
and the
but Donna,
product
you mean the
manufacturers.
sale of. We cannot prohibit recreational marijuana.
Right, I said retail.
But retail, so
yeah.
people don't get confused.
Right,
This
no,
is all
this is
about
not
selling it.
Right, this is not about personal use, personal growth of, every household is allowed to grow 6 plants per person and a maximum of 12 per household. So that isn't what we're talking about, because that ship has sailed, right? It's legalized in Massachusetts. So this is more about the commercialization in Milford. And this doesn't include the medical piece either, because the medical piece is a whole other venue that's
But the
governed by its
medical
own set
piece
of laws.
is not germane to this conversation.
No.
Absolutely not.
Although,
There-
sorry, I just wanted to jump in here and interject. I was talking to you about this the other day. You said that the medical and adult use cannabis are sort of governed by a lot of the same laws, a lot of the same bodies at the state level. Is that correct?
Yeah, the statute that was eventually passed encompasses both the medicinal and the recreational use under the Cannabis Control Commission, whereas the medicinal had been governed by the Department of Public Health. So now it's all going to be under that Cannabis Control
Brian,
Commission.
if I'm getting a
interesting.
prescription, I'm getting a prescription for medical use. This would not affect, this referendum would not affect me.
No, what's happening in Milford is, it's a question, shall the town prohibit retail sales of marijuana? The question expands upon that, as you indicated, and also includes, testing, manufacturing, and cultivation.
But does that
which
mean-
goes beyond just simply retail
Would
sales.
that prohibit sales of medical?
No.
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 So that's what I'm saying.
Just
This is all about
recreational.
This is
recreational.
all about
Retail
recreational, yeah.
recreational.
If my child needs marijuana for treatment of an illness, correct prescription, all that good stuff, this is not going to interfere with my child's ability to get it.
But I think you can go to, if I'm wrong, you can go, for that reason, you could go to the dispensary
Yes.
and get the medical marijuana that
Right.
they need. But from my understanding is if you can cultivate it in your own home for your child, then you would want a place that has testing so that you could then make sure that the dosage is correct for your child.
Right, and I want to get to that because right now we're just talking about availability in Milford, for sale in Milford. Let me ask a question. What is the benefit to having a retail store in Milford?
All right,
I can't think of any.
well then I'll take the question then.
And I'll chime in.
Sure.
Let's let them talk, then I'm going to ask the counter.
I mean, other than the obvious tax benefits, other than the revenue that would come into the town, the benefit to Milford, as I said at the beginning, is that retail marijuana is safe marijuana. To have it being sold by a retail facility means that they have to comply with the state laws that have come out of Beacon Hill. They have to comply with quality. They have to comply with dosing. They have to comply with advertising restrictions. The edibles that are being produced, for instance, they have to be sold in, I believe it's opaque packaging, and it can't look like any other products, and the list goes on and on.
Childproof packaging.
I was just going to say childproof.
Yes,
packaging,
thank you.
yes.
Right, and they can't look like existing food products or Swedish fish, so there's no issue there. In addition, we've seen from other municipalities and from other states that have already legalized adult use cannabis. We've seen a reduction in the black market. We've seen teenage use decrease in some cases. And because you got to remember, the alternative is people will still continue to smoke and to use marijuana as they have done for decades. If retail sales are not allowed in town, they will just either go 15 minutes up the road to Franklin or whatever, or they'll just continue to use the same guy that they're using now.
Before we get into testing, because I think I want to go into depth, but I guess what I'm getting confused at is all the points you're bringing up, I like.
Thank you.
But I don't understand how having a store in a neighboring town versus here makes a difference. If I got to drive 5 minutes or 10 minutes to buy it in Community X, why is that different from driving downtown Milford or Bear Hill?
If the difference between, I'm sorry, I'm a little confused by your point, I gotta be honest, because if the difference between having marijuana and not is just the difference between a 5 and a 10-minute drive, why not do it? Why wouldn't the town of Milford want a say in how it's regulated? Why wouldn't the town want to have a share of that tax revenue? Why wouldn't the town, if the only difference is a 5 or a 10-minute drive, then I honestly can't see a case for voting yes.
Well, can we
Well, it
talk
gives
about
us the
tax revenue?
control.
Because in tax revenue, so let's say that, so the tax rate is at 20%, but the state,
But that's not ours.
no, that's not ours. The state gets most of that money. So 10.75% is part of the state excise tax, and the 6.25% is the regular sales tax in Massachusetts. So up to 3% would benefit the town.
With an
And
additional
that
3%.
excuse me.
Go ahead.
But the 3% isn't a guarantee. So the business owners and the town negotiate a host agreement. So as part of that host agreement, there could be other fees that the town could impose, fees for setup or impact fees. And so the town would negotiate with the potential business owner up to that 3%. So if we're talking $1 million in sales,
It's 30 grand.
it's 30 grand. Not a lot of money. And if someone like Mayor Marty Walsh in Boston, he's predicting that it'll cost 6% for additional resources, because we know additional resources are going to be needed, both for law enforcement, emergency response personnel, education in the school system, substance abuse programs. And so it doesn't weigh out. And if we take that 30,000 and we translate it into, for example, the cost of one full-time police officer with benefits, that's well over $90,000. So it doesn't come close to equating.
Michael?
You know, a piece of this whole puzzle, Al, that people are losing sight of is that property values. You know, as a selectman, I have a responsibility to protect the people that put me in that office. And, you know, what's going to happen if we allow retail marijuana stores to come to the town of Milford? What's going to happen to real estate values? What's going to happen to the people that want to move to the town of Milford, okay, because they've heard about our services, they've heard about financially how strong we are, they've heard about how great our school systems are, and they are. You look at the graduating class last year, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Eisenhower School of Business. What about those people now? They're going to look and say, I don't want to move to a town that has retail marijuana stores, and so they opt to move somewhere else. And that's a very important piece that has to be looked at, is where and the taxpayers are going to have the opportunity to tell us where they are. But we have an obligation, a moral obligation, to make sure that we protect their real estate values, and we encourage people to continue to move to town. We encourage businesses to continue to want to be in the town of Milford. What about businesses that may say, you know what, I don't want to be in there because of that?
Now,
So
Have
before
you
we
heard
go
of
on.
any cases of that happening?
Can I just clarify a point on the revenue, because there's a couple of gaps there that I think people ought to realize, you know. You know, the revenue locally is 3% out of that 20% tax. There's an additional 3%
kicker.
that can be had through a host agreement. So a community could get up to 6% of the gross retail sales. The other excise tax that does go to the state, the statute says that the initial funds collected need to fund the Cannabis Control Commission and administration of the law. After that, there's a succession of areas where that fund needs to go: substance abuse prevention, education, health awareness. So there's a series of steps that presumably the CCC, with the advisory committee that's set up, I would envision would set up some sort of grant program where communities could apply for those kinds of funds. Now, you know, it was said that, you know, $30,000 is not a lot of money. Well, I mean, I was on the Board of Selectmen when we had to fight to get $28,000 to fund our opioid task force. And there were people who did not want their taxes to increase because of quote-unquote druggies. So, you know, to me, I mean, I would see that as a dedicated revenue stream that could fund your opioid task force right away and just build that program.
And I wasn't
You wouldn't
aware-
have, you
Hold
wouldn't
on.
have to worry about increasing people's taxes. You wouldn't have to worry about going to town meeting for that. So, I mean, that's a significant item that folks need to be aware of and need to understand. The original marijuana ballot question, which was drawn by the marijuana lobbying industry and favorable to them, had local receipts at only 2%. So the state increased that and then also set up that tiered program to allow even some of the money going into the state general fund to be filtered down for these various
Now,
prevention
before we
programs.
go on, I want to we talked about testing. So I want to put you on the spot. I didn't say I'd be nice to you. Why do I care about testing?
Well, so whether it's medicinal or adult use, whether it's a family member or yourself, you want to know that the product you're consuming is safe. One of the biggest problems nationwide for the cannabis industry is the prevalent use of pesticides. We see it all over the place. And so in unregulated markets, the amount of pesticide-contaminated materials is very high. In California, they say as much as 80%.
So you're saying ingesting malathion and parathion is not a good thing for the human body?
Probably not. And then there's heavy metals, there's microbiological contaminants. There's all these different things that can taint our cannabis, whether it's, again, recreational, adult use, or medicinal. And it's critical. If you're going to be using these products, you want to make sure that you're not doing harm by ingesting things that weren't intended to be in there.
Now, Chris, I read about, and this is just my opinion, I get nervous. If you had Nero's pot store, I know it would never happen. But if you had, Donna's pot store down.
Jeff would run it.
I don't know for sure, but I would think that they would be a lot more careful about allowing fentanyl-laced pot to be sold, because I know who you are, I know how to chase you, versus somebody on the street, I don't know they have the same ethics.
So absolutely, and under the Massachusetts regulations, all product that is sold in the medical dispensaries today is required to be 100% batch tested. Under the new regulations for adult use, it's a little bit unclear, but it looks like it's going to be 100% testing as well. So there is going to be comprehensive testing requirements for the adult use. So the product that you're going to get in a dispensary is safe, and the product that you're going to buy in a retail adult use store is going to be tested for safety. And it's going to be under the oversight of the new Cannabis Commission, I believe. And so you're going to have a secure product supply. If that mechanism isn't there, so today there's many dispensaries that are open illegally in the state of Massachusetts, and they are selling product which is heavily contaminated.
Well, wait a minute, read that one back. We have dispensaries that are open illegally.
So there's people who are selling black market.
Okay, so it's not, when you say dispensary, it's
I
in
call it-
Easter,
they-
you want to buy some, it's not a store, it's not
It's-
Donna's pot store.
Correct.
Right.
It's black market, and it is not tested. And so very frequently, we have people buying product on the black market. They bring it to me for testing, and I say, I have a red stamp, not fit for human consumption, because it's got pesticides or it's heavily contaminated with heavy metals. And these people are now out that money.
But if
Can
we-
I just ask a
Not to
question?
mention the danger.
Oh, and
Yeah.
that's
Can I
my
just ask you a
population.
question? So that's a very, very valid
Huge.
point. How do we know that that isn't going to happen in the retail stores?
How do we know that it's not going to be tested?
No, that something like that will end up in a retail store and get sold.
Because the retail stores are going to be very heavily watched and under the oversight of the Cannabis Commission.
And I
That was a key feature, both at the House level, the Senate, and certainly from the governor. And I think it's one of the features of the Massachusetts law, the heavy testing, heavy regulation. It was felt that that was the best way to get it out of the black market. Particularly, we see this marijuana, I think primarily on the Cape, is being laced with carfentanil, which I don't even know what that is, but it sounds really bad. But it's a dangerous product that's out there. So, the idea behind the retail sales, as indicated, is it's going to be tested, and you know that the product you're going to be
See,
getting
now
is safe.
that makes all the sense in the world. Sorry, but.
I'd like to talk about accessibility, though.
Okay, but before I give it to my child for medical, I want it tested.
Right.
Before I ingest it, or eat it, smoke it, whatever, I'd like to have a good housekeeping seal that
Exactly.
says it's
Exactly.
safe.
Sure,
Well-
sure.
But now the question, and this is where I want to go, would Milford have any, we got the CCC, they're supposed to set the rules. Would Milford have any say over those rules?
Well, there's also a degree of local regulation, which goes to your point before about, I forget whether you use Bellingham or Franklin. The local boards, whether it's Selectmen or Board of Health, or maybe even the Building Department, you have a lot of local discretion and ability to control businesses that might not match up to your community standards. And you might not have the same community standards as a community next door. So there could be a dispensary in the surrounding town that might be state compliant in terms of product, but might not otherwise be operating the business the way you would like to have it in your particular community. If that was in Milford, you'd have the chance to regulate that. If you don't have it, you don't have that control.
Donna? you
Yeah,
have-
so
I'll
I
get
would
you,
like to
Amy.
talk about accessibility and other things that are known from the Colorado experience. So Paul Mazzucchelli, the Milford public health agent, has stated that as access to a drug substance increases, so does use by youth. And that has been validated by studies done in Colorado and in Washington. And with the use, or with the accessibility and the window shopping type aspect, there's that appeal, there's that curiosity level that builds. Additionally, it's known that communities that host recreational marijuana facilities, in those communities, there's an increase in motor vehicle accidents and a marked increase in robberies because, as we know, this marijuana is still illicit at the federal level. So there's no governing we don't have any governing support from the federal level. Therefore, the industry is primarily a cash industry. And the banks, they have recreational marijuana facilities have a difficult time obtaining loans and whatnot because of the F and the FDIC, right? So there's a lot of cash that's being handed off, and that leads to an increase in crime, both with robberies for cash and robberies for product.
Okay, hold on, Amy, then Chris, then Brian. I'm keeping track, but you.
Well, I was just thinking as I was listening to everything, kind of being like on the front lines of all of, in what I do every day of working with, kids and parents who have addiction and, marijuana being the first thing that they start to use, and knowing recently the impact of these edibles, that the kids are having, that they don't even know how much is put into it. And, the effects that it's having on them, whether it's them getting sick now, knowing from pesticides or whatever. And, to know that there could be a regulation for that is really important. And now to know that these parents could take these things that they find to, your facility and, get them tested is a benefit, because it's so many resources we need.
There's no pharmaceutical I know of that doesn't state the API concentration, the active pharmaceutical ingredient. Could we, and maybe speculation, but as Milford, could the selectmen say, thou shalt not sell something that isn't labeled with
You don't
content?
need to because the state has already done
Right.
that.
Ah.
The state has already mandated that.
So
That's
they're
part
gonna
of-
have to get a Pro Verde stamp of approval that
Absolutely.
says, this is 2 mgs or some,
Absolutely.
okay.
And
Today-
that's so huge. And I think the other part is that when we think about like the control issue, is I remember back years ago, looking at when some of the smoke shops and they would sell like pipes, and it was so fast that the Milford Police Department would go in and make sure that they were fulfilling the regulations of what they were selling, that we'll have that control of what's going to be there too. It's such a huge topic.
Chris, you were next?
Yeah, so there was a comment made about window shopping. These are very discreet locations. They don't have like a bakery window where they have the marijuana wares displayed out. It's very responsible, and it's not easily accessible. A lot of these statistics that you talk about, especially when you talk about cash transactions, those are valid points a year ago, 2 years ago. This industry is growing so rapidly in the banking section, so there are now credit unions that will permit bank transactions, that will allow credit card transactions. So a lot of these things that you are referencing were valid points a year ago,
Well,
but it's
there's-
changing so fast.
They're still valid now until we see a change.
The change has already
And-
happened.
But wait a minute now, Chris, I read, and it scared the heck out of me, that in Colorado, you got rooms full of cash, and they gotta bring Brinks trucks in and out, because the cash has to be moved and no bank will touch them. Now, I don't know how old my data point is.
It's not that old, but it's transitioning very fast because of the concerns with having that amount of cash. And so my guess is that by the time the adult use goes into effect in 2018, those issues will be completely resolved.
Brian, I'll get to you next, but now, a point I really wanna make, we say adult use. This ye old 12-year-old can't show up and buy marijuana if we have a store.
Correct. So adult use, to me, encompasses adults that are over 21 that would like to use a product to get stoned for recreational use. But for me, the largest demographic are people who are using it as adults. They're using it to help their arthritis. They're using it to help Crohn's. They may not want to go through the medical marijuana process. They might be using it to help themselves sleep. So to me, you have medical use, and then you have recreational use, but then there's this huge other segment that is adult use, which is really, It's more on the medical side, but you're not going through the motion of the medical stuff. And so it's rolled into the recreational use, even though the majority of those people are not using it to get stoned.
Now, I'm going to I'll get to you next, Brian, put you on the spot. Is there a danger that they go, instead of going to Sage with the prescription, getting medical stamp of approval, they go to Donna's Ye Old Pot store and buy recreational? Is there going, in your mind, going to be a difference in quality levels?
No,
or-
absolutely not. The state has mandated that it has to be tested pretty much to the same level. There might be some differences in limits of permissible contaminants. Those haven't been established yet, but my belief is that they'll be very similar. So
So-
it will be absolutely. So when you talk about medical marijuana, one of our biggest concerns when you talk about contaminants is people who have compromised immune systems. And so you want to make sure that anything that they are consuming is, certainly very low on those contaminant levels. But for adult use and other medical conditions, that is not necessarily the case. And so maybe a slightly higher tolerance would be acceptable. But it will be, the testing that is done for cannabis will exceed what's done for most food products.
Now, I don't know if I can ask you this, so if it's overstepping, tell me, because you
Okay.
explained the model of hemp to gummies. Can you walk us through, or is that proprietary knowledge?
To do what? To create?
Testing. I mean, I start somewhere and I have hemp, and I
Yep.
want to sell it.
Yep.
I end somewhere where I have a brown paper bag full of edible.
Yep.
Can you explain how many times you touch and why you touch?
So,
If you can.
yeah,
I don't-
we've identified for certain product streams, we may have tested 6 or 7 times in the process. So the cultivator will,
The
as he's.
same batch.
The same, yes. So the cultivator is monitoring cultivation. He will submit it to me for testing to monitor growth. Now it's come to maturity, he harvests it, he dries it, he sends it to me for testing.
Why?
So that he knows what the potency or what the.
So if I want to sell it to Michael, I can say, I have a potency of X.
Absolutely.
Here's my Proverti, one of the leading labs in the country,
Yep.
certificate.
And so he sells it to Mike. Mike says, I want to confirm it, so they send it to me for
So I
testing.
don't trust Al.
So he sends it to me
So
for testing.
You're going to test what you already tested?
Yes. And then, so he gets the results back and says, okay, now I'm going to make something of it. So I'm going to extract the CBD from it, the cannabinoids from it. And you get a rich oil. But in order to do anything with it, you have to know what the concentration is. So they send it to me again for testing. I say, this is what it is. This is how you're going to formulate it. So they might add olive oil to make a tincture. So now they've created a formulation that they want to make sure that it's
My
10
grandfather.
mg per mil.
Any Italian or Portuguese grandfather's rolling over in their grave.
Olive oil is great for everything, don't you
Yeah,
know?
I was going to say, you're tainting my olive oil.
Olive oil is great
But
for
listen,
everything.
I said it before, I'll say it again. Pot's not new. You don't know what your grandfather was doing.
Oh, bite your tongue. My sainted mother never.
I didn't say your sainted mother.
Okay.
Okay, so then we test the formulation, they'll put it in a bottle, and now they have to, oftentimes for regulatory purposes, now they have to take a bottle of that and send it to testing. So they send that to me and I confirm that the bottle is now free from contaminants. They sell that to Joe on the street. Joe says, I'm not sure I got what I paid for, so he'll bring it to me and test it. So we test multiple times in any given pathway for production.
You've now made me feel a lot better that, it's almost like the FDA's process for doing a pharmaceutical. Every step along the way,
Absolutely.
you're testing, putting your stamp on.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's really interesting the point you brought up about the sort of adult use as that third category, because I've heard from people who said, yes, I've had doctors recommend to me, you should try marijuana if they have migraines or stomach problems or whatever. But the doctor who recommends marijuana won't prescribe marijuana because he doesn't want his name on a database somewhere. And so I think that's a really interesting point.
And sometimes these conditions aren't on the list of approved conditions.
Sure. Can you also talk about the security at all? I know Sage has a very intense
Hold on one
security
second.
procedure.
Let Donna go, and then we'll come back to security. 'Cause I know you've been very nice and holding off. I can see you.
Well, there are so many points that are being discussed, and I'd like to jump in at different points. But we're talking about, okay, the testing facility is great, and I thoroughly support what you're doing. However, the majority of recreational marijuana users are not running over to you to get their marijuana tested. And there's a lot of things that are being passed around on the street. The black market is going to continue to exist. We know that in Denver, the police chief has said that the black market is alive and booming. And his recommendation to the Westboro chief of police was to hold on to your hat, because it's like the Wild West out there. In Colorado, they have changed their law 13 times since recreational marijuana was legalized.
Well, I guess I'm confused. If we have Donna's Pot Store, how does that affect the guy on the street who, I mean, I think we all worry about the guy on the street because his ethics and business practices probably are less than the person who signed for a license.
But we have to look at the impact that the recreational shops really have on the town. And nothing that I have seen, that has read, that is positive. It's the increase in crime, the increase in accidents, the accessibility to children. And going back to the products, going back to the edible products, yes, the packages are child-proof and they're labeled, the serving size is listed. But what happens when you have it out of the package? And what happens when there's a plate of brownies sitting on your table and your child doesn't know the difference between one or the other? So there was just a case locally where 9-year-old students, elementary school, he was bringing in brownies into school and sharing them with his friends at school.
But Donna, let me ask a pointed question. My child probably doesn't know the difference between water and vodka. Isn't it my responsibility to make sure I don't leave a glass of vodka or out on the table?
Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we could be having that same discussion
So
about
now
alcohol.
point-
However, it's not the
But point two,
same
do you,
discussion.
I guess what I'm asking is, do you feel that by having a pot store in Milford, it'll increase the usage because the accessibility is easier?
Absolutely, and that's been validated. That's been validated both with Colorado and with Washington.
So if it's more
They-
accessible, more people are likely to use it.
Right, and it doesn't, legalizing it or embracing it doesn't, it entices use at a younger age. And you know, we have to think about, starting from the Surgeon General on down. The Surgeon General states that that marijuana is a serious problem. So why are we are amidst a national opioid crisis. Why do we want to bring in something else that's
But this one,
That's,
the pot store wouldn't sell opioids,
So-
right?
I have an interesting point about that.
No.
Let her finish, then I'll go to you,
But
Brian.
we're adding to what's already available.
so-
And if we think about the image that Milford has, Al, you've lived here long enough, and you've known, you know, back in the
Carmack in 1973.
exactly. And so Milford's image was tarnished, and it took a lot for the Milford Police Department to clean up that drug issue.
Brian, you've been sitting patiently then. Chris.
1973, huh?
I think it was was it 73? Johnny Carson, Milford, Massachusetts.
Yes, absolutely.
on the wall.
My father was
he-
my
There
father
a
was still in
drug
high school back
traffic
then.
because
So-
we were located in that triangle between Providence and Boston.
Well, they chased him out of.
Yeah.
They chased him out of Boston. They went to Worcester. They chased him out of Worcester. Milford was right between Worcester, Boston, and Providence. And I remember Johnny Carson. I was like, oh my God. The
He
only
named-
way he knows my
Yep.
little town is the third largest per capita drug trafficking area. And that was not something that I was
But
proud
Al,
of.
And
Al,
Milford
no
has that-
offense, that was a long time ago.
Oh yeah, it was 70s. That's what I say. That was.
Okay.
Why do we want to go back and tarnish our image
Brian,
again?
your turn.
I wanted to raise an interesting point about the opioids. We've seen, at least in the case of medical marijuana, when medical marijuana is allowed in a community, opioid use goes down.
Dramatically.
Opioid abuse goes way down. We've seen that all over the place.
But we're not
We've-
talking about medical.
Well, you were just talking about opioids. We also, I've seen studies that have shown teen use has decreased or stayed the same in Colorado and Washington. I've seen surveys from Washington State that say teens find marijuana harder to get now that it's legalized because it's like trying to go into a liquor store when you're under 21. You can't go in there and, three guys in a trench coat.
So are you trying to say that the age of 21 is going to be the deterrent? Because we know that's certainly not the case
Well, we know
for
it's
both
better.
alcohol or for tobacco use. So there's no
Are you
difference.
suggesting we ban alcohol and tobacco?
I am not suggesting
Guys,
that at
No,
all.
guys.
but wait a minute, because
On
I
point.
can go. We've heard a lot of the same arguments here that you could use against alcohol and tobacco, and frankly against gambling, because these are all addicting things that can have a complicated societal
But with all
impact.
due
But I can
respect,
walk.
we cannot debate whether or not marijuana is available to responsible adults in a controlled situation. That's a given.
I agree.
But don't you drive to, where's the nearest shopping mall, right? Is it in Milford? No.
Natick.
If you want to, we go all over to buy furniture, to go to the movies. We drive out of town. Let's keep it in someone else's town.
Michael, you had,
Everybody brings up a valid point, Alan, when you get into a discussion with people about retail marijuana stores. Some people bring up liquor stores. The liquor industry is very, very regulated, and we have a problem with underage people getting into a liquor store and buying liquor. So why would we want to add a second problem? Because that's going to happen. When you open retail marijuana stores, you're going to have the same issues that you're going to have, that we're currently dealing with task force that go around the town of Milford, and we do a really, really good job with all the establishments in the town of Milford that sell alcohol. Maybe we get one. That's really, a great job. But why do we want to open up another avenue?
Chris, you seem.
Yeah, so, a lot of this discussion that we've been having has been focused on retail sales. I think the ballot as written is overreaching in that, yes, maybe I'm grandfathered in, maybe Sage is grandfathered in, but what about other production facilities? Today, I would say that cannabis employs probably 60 to 75 people in Milford. Within 2 years, that was expected to be almost 260 people employed in the cannabis industry. That would only grow. And so part of, there's a little bit different debate between whether or not we have retail pot shops or what the ballot is about, which is prohibition of all adult use activities. And they're very different questions. It's almost like the voters are being given a false choice, whether they want the retail pot shops or not. But the consequences of not are also very large in terms of the employment opportunities. You had said something about the real estate value. One of the problems we've seen in other states that have enacted this is that the real estate has gone through the roof and it's almost prohibitively expensive because real estate has not suffered at all. And so we hear a lot of statistics, and it's 50% of all statistics are made up, including that one. But it depends on whose numbers you look at, because we do see real estate values going up in these areas. We do see children use of cannabis going down when it's regulated. We do see opioid use going down when there is available cannabis. And so I think the issue is not just whether or not we have these retail shops, but the ballot as written, and I think that's what we're here to discuss.
Al, if I could just say one thing, because I think there is some information that folks really ought to be aware of. The Board of Selectmen was very proactive in this last year, and we put forth a zoning amendment. So these retail marijuana shops just cannot open anywhere. They're limited to the IA district. So that's, I think, a very safe harbor in terms of where they'd be available throughout
Now,
the town.
Brian,
Well,
before
I
we
need
get
to
on,
correct you on that, though,
I want to put
Brian.
you on the
It's-
spot, and since it's a bad question, you can opt out.
Okay, I'll opt out, yeah.
Chris brings up the fact that we took care of 2 Milford businesses, 2 solid Milford businesses. Selectmen said, they've been good, we're gonna grandfather them. Now, if I wanted to open up anti-Verdi instead of pro-Verdi,
Don't do that.
and no, but if I came into town and I said, I want to cultivate, I want to do something like you do, I want to be a competitor. Brian, in your mind, are we opening the door that I could come into the selectmen and say, hey, you let the guy in the green shirt, why can't the guy in the blue shirt do the same thing?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what happened at the selectmen's
No,
meeting.
but
Eric
right now,
talked
we
about
think he's
grandfathering.
grandfathered.
I don't know. I don't know. I can't answer that question. I mean, it
But if
has
he
a lot of
was-
legal
No, but
ramifications
if he
one way or
was
the other.
grandfathered,
I don't know what that means. I mean, does
Oh,
that
okay,
mean
right.
because, it's a pre-existing non-conforming use under the zoning bylaw? Or was there some special vote or action that the board took specific to them? I didn't see the meeting Monday night, so I have no idea what the board did.
yeah, I'm just trying to think.
But I think
to
the
say-
key, I think people need to realize is that it's limited to certain zoning districts in the town.
So on that zoning, so there is zoning regulations in Milford, and then there were these exemptions that were put on top of that, correct? The Bill Buckley exemptions.
200 feet
So
from the
the-
school.
the-
and
the-
church,
the-
so-
right.
Correct.
That occurred
So-
afterwards, yeah.
What I've asked people is, that, okay, if you
Limitations.
overlay those, where could somebody potentially establish a retail shop today?
Oh, there are many locations.
No one can tell me that. I have not found anyone who can show me a map that says you could
I
cite
can
one
send you
here. You have one? of
Oh, I
those?
have the map.
Okay.
If you'd like to see it,
I absolutely-
absolutely, because it's actually for the IB and IC areas in town, and it's all the major gateways.
Yeah,
So
but
there
Donna,
could be.
explain IBIC, because people
Yeah,
are.
no, IBIC are just the way that it's zoned industrially. So there are those areas in Milford that have that zoning, and I can't speak to what IB
But it's
is
not
versus
downtown.
IC.
But
No, it's not downtown. It could be in the Kohl's Plaza, could be all along Fortune Boulevard, over by
Scioli's.
Wendy's. It's the whole Fortune Boulevard corridor, Route 16, from.
So there are a lot of locations.
There are a lot of
That's-
locations,
that's
but
the
there's an
zoning.
extra, there's an added restriction that includes 200 feet from any school,
And is that-
residential.
is that reflected on your map? Because most of
Absolutely.
Fortune Boulevard would be exempt because there's adult daycare centers, there's children's daycare centers. So even though the zoning under the IBIC would permit siting of a retail shop there, because of these additional exemptions, they couldn't be on Fortune Boulevard.
No, they can be. They can be because of the distance, so it's within 200 feet, so there's enough of a distance. So it depends where they're located on Fortune Boulevard. They wouldn't be able to be next door to the child care center.
So they couldn't
So-
put something up to next door to Bobby Littleton's Evergreen Center.
Correct.
Right, that's
Because
correct.
that would protect.
That's correct, and not next to a playground, the youth center, a church, or other place of worship. But they could be in some of the shopping areas that are existing, as I said, the Kohl's Plaza, Quarry Square, over by the Tradesmen,
Over by Scioli's is another area.
over by Scioli's, yes, and that plaza as well.
And I
And those are those are gateways to our community, so it's, quick in, quick out. So when I was talking about robberies before and things like that, it's an easy access.
I think another one of the areas we talked about, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, only you would know about it, was one of the areas is, to Donna's point, nothing through the main street downtown, but from Brian's office to the hospital, I believe is an area.
I don't know if that's zoned
Yeah.
IA
I think
or
that was the
IB or-
original one, was that area.
Okay.
And I think when we changed it for the town meeting, that's when it took it out of
Yeah,
that
that-
area.
That,
If I remember-
that
But it's
piece-
primarily, for folks to realize, it's primarily in your business industrial areas.
Right.
Certainly not
I-
residential, not your neighborhood commercial downtown.
Yeah, but if I remember when we were at town meeting, it really was focused at, hey, the downtown, next to people's homes, you're not gonna have that. But if you wanna go, and I don't know if the hospital, how that rates in, but down there, or Kohl's, or,
Right, but could be located right next to the Papagenos
does
in town.
anybody have any idea on what kind of revenue we're talking about? I mean, we've had these discussions, 30 grand, it's 30 grand. But is it 60, is it 300 grand? I mean, if we're getting, and let's face it, I mean, if we can get 6% on something like this, selectmen are probably gonna go for the 6%. Why wouldn't you?
By the members.
I was gonna say, you can't speak, but why wouldn't you, right?
That's
But
if
are we
it's
talking
negotiated.
6% of 10 million? Are we talking 6% of 1 million? Does anybody have an idea, a 28,000 person Colorado town, what their,
I think of the 28,000 that we put in for the regional task force, and to see how many people's lives that we've saved already, is
Yeah, but Amy,
priceless.
here's what I'm stuck with. I'll get to you in a second, Brian.
Okay.
Can we link pot and I mean, you've convinced me, Tom O'Loughlin's convinced me that Oxy is a gateway to heroin, because they can't afford the
Right.
$80 a tablet, they go to the $15. I'll buy that. Do we have any real link pot or alcohol with opioids?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, most definitely. I mean, I think people may start that way, you know, like maybe they start experimenting with alcohol and marijuana and, you know, it just kind of bridges. They don't stop smoking weed. I mean, a lot of, in my experience, that is how
But,
nobody
yeah,
started
I remember,
with
yes, in college, had to smoke some, had to try it.
I didn't.
My daughters will kill me. But I never jumped from having a joint
Well, I
to
don't
saying,
think
now I
it's-
want to.
So if you look at biker gang, most guys in a biker gang, they're pretty rough. They probably all started riding a trike. Is a trike a gateway to becoming a member of a biker gang? I doubt it.
I'd have a hard time making that correlation. You know, to say, I grew up on a trike and I'm scared to death to ride a motorcycle.
that. And I think there's
Well, right,
very
and so-
variables to that
Just
someone
because you
getting
use
there.
cannabis doesn't mean you're going to end up in
Yeah,
using
I mean,
opioids. There's no connection.
I bet a
Right.
lot of people who don't want to admit it, in college said, I got to try this. But I
And
never.
some put it down and some progressed. I mean, it's just,
1978, I
And some-
graduated. Somewhere back there I tried, but I can't remember jumping from there to cocaine or, you know, heroin or anything else. I'm trying to figure out how we draw those lines.
Addiction.
They're not there.
I mean, and I think it's, I mean, I think it's addiction, but I think it's also in my experience. You know, I do deal with that correlation. That is what I've
Amy,
seen.
I'm not questioning you. I may be the oddball that tried it and then just said, nah. You know, I mean, I've tried scotch. I like scotch, but I'm just happy with a cup of coffee, as you can tell.
I don't think it is that odd, to be honest. We know, for instance, there's been Gallup's polls that show 13% of Americans use marijuana habitually. So that's what? 35?
13%?
1-3, yeah. So
That's
that's
like
30
50 million people.
Sure. Are there 50 million future opioid addicts running around?
Maybe.
That's a heck of a
Could
market.
be.
You're going to be busy.
The
think
other
we
thing
need
I wanted to get back
Fine,
to
I'll
the
get you
Colorado
next.
thing. I wanted to get back to the Colorado thing you mentioned, because you did give this to me as a sort of a homework assignment when we talked. And it's interesting, Colorado's population is obviously, now, again, to preface this, nobody has a revenue projection. The state, according, from what I understand.
I haven't heard of any revenue projections. It would be too, I guess, speculative, and I don't know if it's apples to apples if you look at other states. You know, it's a
Right.
different tax source, different
Sure.
demographics, that kind of stuff.
Colorado's tax is more like a 1% local tax.
In fact, there were some amendments to the bill to target specific numbers to substance abuse prevention and treatment, and they got voted down because of the uncertainty, I think, of the revenue numbers.
Sure. So the Colorado Department of Taxation puts all their revenue figures on a month-by-month basis, just to make my life difficult, month-by-month basis on their website. And there are a number of towns with 20, 30,000 people that also think they're the center of the universe. And some of them have made on the order of 12,000 a month,
No, but I guess what I'm
13,000 a
at-
month.
How much
and some of
volume
them,
is generated? 12,000 a month at 1%, or is it?
12,000 a month at 1%. So that's after. That is their take. Their take is 12,000. In some cases, it's been as high as 50,000.
So that-
And again, it depends on the
So
environment.
that's $10–12 million revenue a year.
Certainly,
If
certainly it's more than 30,000. Let's put it that way. You know, and again, we've brought this up sort of sarcastically before, but Milford and Massachusetts is a lot more populated. There are more population centers around. There will be, I mean, a lot of Colorado is empty.
It's going to be interesting, but I want to end. Brian, obviously you're for Donna being able to open a pot store in Milford. I want to give you a minute for a take-home message. Then Donna, I'd like, since you seem to be hesitant to open a pot store in Milford,
Just a little.
to have you give a minute as your take-home. And then Chris, I think we're all agreeing, whichever way you get it, I don't want fentanyl and, you know, heavy metals, so I'd like you to give 1 minute on safety. So Brian, 1 minute. Why
Well, Al, you
should you vote no?
Al, you segued into it perfectly. We don't want fentanyl in it. We don't want heavy metals. We don't want pesticides. We don't want our children using it. We don't want the black market to continue operating unabated. That's why we're arguing that it should be taxed and be regulated and controlled the way alcohol is. That way the town can participate in the process. Look, and I said it at the beginning and I'll say it again. Whether or not this ballot, this referendum passes, there will be marijuana in Milford. People will be using it, people can drive to go get it, all of that. People can grow it in their backyards. The question is, are we going to derive any benefits? Are we going to have any control over it or not? And if you want to control it, as personally I do, if you want to control it for the town of Milford, then you should vote no.
Donna.
We are advocating for a vote yes vote to prohibit recreational marijuana industry in town. And if we look at the Colorado law, the law was written where towns had to opt in to open recreational shops and other forms of industry. About 1/3 of the towns in Colorado chose to opt in. Many of those towns now are trying to figure out how they can opt out. So that's very telling as far as how it's working out for them. I have spoken to 2 people who've lived in Colorado and they've moved. One of them is actually living in Milford, and she's expressed her grave concern over the industry coming into town. She's concerned about her property values going down. I've spoken to Josh Leoch and Carolyn Hildebrand, both realtors in town, and there are many people who are concerned about property values. Josh has already said that he's already hearing that Milford has an image problem already, and why do we want to, exacerbate that and make it more difficult?
Chris.
Yeah.
40 seconds on safety.
Okay, on safety, if you're going to have product out there, it should be tested for safety. I mean, certainly, as we already said, the adult use has that level of required testing that will be governed by the Cannabis Commission. So there's absolutely no question that it should be there. I hear a lot about Colorado, but Colorado was on the cutting edge. They made a lot of mistakes because they were brand new to this. And yes, they did have challenges, and they still have challenges. But part of that was because nobody had paved this pathway before. We've learned from their mistakes. Other states, Alaska has learned from their mistakes. California has done a fantastic job as they move forward with this. And so, yeah, we don't want to repeat the same mistakes that have happened in Colorado, but using all those examples of what went wrong there is not, for me, a means of creating fear around something that should not necessarily be so fearful.
Brian, any words from Beacon Hill?
It was not an easy issue. We had gotten lobbied from a number of different interest groups. The original question was not satisfactory to municipal groups, medical groups, public safety. I think the statute that's on the books now is a good one. It's allowing this kind of debate to occur at the community level, what should happen in terms of what the community values ought to be. It presents a good revenue stream, a meaningful revenue stream, I think, for communities. It promotes safety, which I think Chris has really expounded upon. And I think it's going to boil down to really, what's the feeling of the community? Is this something they want or they don't want?
Michael, 15 seconds.
I think it's important that, and Chris makes a very valid point about the testing facilities, and I learned a lot from him tonight on it. But what we're concerned about is the retail marijuana stores. That's what we have a real concern with. Not me personally, I want to learn more about the testing, as Amy does. And I think a lot of people in town, I think we need to get that communicated. But it's a concern that I have is the operation of the retail stores.
Well, thank everyone for caring enough about our little town to get up and talk about it. As always, not the point of this show to sway your vote. Point of the shows we do for our 6 loyal viewers is to get you better educated. There are forums coming up. There are a lot of resources that you can tap to learn more about this issue. Please whichever way you feel, whether yes is no or no is yes, learn, and then get out, vote, because this is a critical issue. To our 6 loyal viewers, well, we got 6 here, maybe we're up to 12 tonight. Thank you for joining. May God bless, and may tomorrow be a better night than tonight. Thank you.